In this video, I want to talk about different ways I would set up Adobe Illustrator to create my infographic. Now, this actually translates really well to Photoshop and InDesign or any other software, but the main thing I want to know is what colors I'm going to use, what fonts I'm going to use, and also the placement of everything. Now, as far as the size of our document, remember, as long as it's larger than 11 by 17, I'm okay with that. But I don't really know exactly how much room I'm going to need right now, but I can guesstimate. I do know I need to have enough room to have five different areas to place all my research, plus plenty of room for a title and any subtitles that go into it. So for now, I'm just going to make mine 15 by 20. Later on, I can change it up if I see that I need a little bit more room. We'll say Create. And since I'm working in Adobe Illustrator, I have a good range of tools that help me create color schemes and also create and divide this up into a grid. Now, the first thing I want to do is to make sure I've got a good margin to work on my page. I'm going to turn on my rulers by going up to View and go down to Show Rulers or Show Extras. There's my rulers. Turn it on. And I want to give myself just a 1/4 inch margin along all the sides. Excuse me, I'm going to make this a 1/2 inch because it's a nice big poster. Now, inside of this 1/2 inch area, I also want to divide it up into a grid so that I can place things nice and modularly inside of it. Illustrator does have a rectangular grid tool, and with it, when you click and drag, you can divide it up into grids, and you can use your up and down arrow keys to add or take away rows and columns. But the downside to this tool is that it doesn't allow for some gutter spacing between each of these rows and columns, and I want to have that flexibility. To do that, we're going to use just our simple rectangle tool. Now with rectangle, I can click and drag between my margins to create a nice little rectangle. And with it still selected, I can go up to Object, down to Path, and let's break this rectangle up into a grid by choosing Split into Grid. Inside of here, do make sure Preview is turned on, and I'm also going to tell it to add the guides. You'll see what that does in just a second. Now I can increase the number of rows and columns, and this will split it into a grid, but I can also increase the amount of gutter space or the space between each one of these as well. So this will allow me to have much more flexibility in where we're working. In my case, maybe as far as the number of rows go, I'll give it 10 rows, and we'll give it something kind of comparable for columns. In this case, maybe 8 columns. That gives me a nice little squared off area to work in. And again, for gutter, I want to give myself some space in between so that I can place everything, but also have some breathing room between it. You can play around with the placement, size of grids, depending on the needs for your design too. Now when I say OK, you can see that I've got a variety of squares, and it gives me, in this case, little green lines that are my guidelines. To turn these into true guides, you can select the green lines, so just the green lines are selected. Then you can go up to View, down to Guides, and tell it to make the guides. And this will turn it into non-printing guidelines. From here, you can then select all of the squares and delete those away, and now you're left with just a solid set of guidelines to place all of your information on. What I like to do is have this be my guide layer. So I'm going to go up to my Layers panel, I'll call it my Guides, and we'll place this in here and use that. The next thing I need to focus on is creating a variety of swatches that I can use to limit my color palette and use throughout my entire design. Now to do this, I've been playing around with color.adobe.com, and from here you can create your own variety of swatches. So if you want to dial in specifically the colors that you want, especially if you want to use a color harmony, I like to either explore or look at different trends, and with these trends I can see what other people are using based on their photographs or their research that they want to work into. So these kind of have a good little starting point. If I find something that I like I really liked this one, I can then either take a screenshot of it or I can download it directly as an ASE file. I want to be able to create my own swatches from these, so that's what I've done already. I took a screenshot of that. I'm going to bring it into my document. Now I've got my 5 different swatches. To save them up quickly, I'm going to create 5 little rectangles. I'll just place them right here on top. Then I can use my eyedropper tool to select one of the rectangles and apply the color. So again, select the rectangle and apply a color for each. To place these into my swatches panel, all I need to do is to select the 5 rectangles that I created, and I can go over to my swatches and I can tell it to add the selected colors. You can see how these are all added to the end of my little swatches panel. I'm going to take it a step farther. We'll deselect it. When you select all of the swatches in your swatches panel, you can group them together into a folder. In this case, I'm going to call this my rice infographic. Now I can use these and pick and choose from here. I can even take it a step farther. If I want to have tints and shades of each one of these, I can open up my color picker or my color guide. And the deal with the color guide is that you can also add on lighter versions or even darker versions of the colors that you have selected. So sometimes this also comes in handy for being able to use these. All you need to do is to drag them into here, and then you can save these up as different versions. So for instance, maybe I want some lighter versions of these darker colors. That looks good. Maybe a darker version of some of these lighter colors. And because they're all within the same color group, they all work really, really well to harmonize together. Once I've got my colors selected, all I've got to do is to get rid of these. Now I can start planning out all my different areas and how I want to use these, including any fonts that I have too. Now to plan this out, I know I've got 5 different sets of information that I need to place on here. Just as a starting point, rather than looking at a blank white area, I'm going to choose my rectangle and I'm going to give it just a simple little background to place my information on. In this case, I'll make it nice and dark and cover in the entire area. From here, I can use a different color to map out where I want stuff to be. For instance, I know I want my timeline and bubble of events to kind of snake through the entire area. So with this, maybe I'll choose a slightly lighter color, and I can use my grid to click and drag through and place things inside of there. If I need a little bit more room, just use your grid to resize everything to place stuff in there. Now I need to divide out the other 4 areas into here, and for that, again, we can use the same color, click and drag, or I can give it a different color to make it look a little bit different to determine that. Because everything is modular, I can always move it around. I can always give it its own area. Hey, in this case, it gives me some room left over at the top to give myself kind of a fancy little title. So now, especially if I turn off my grids and guides, I know exactly where I'm going to place everything. And I've got an area at the top for my title, for my timeline, and all of my other little infographics. If I find that I don't have enough room to be able to place things and I need to be able to change things up, easy enough to do. All I need to do is to choose my artboard tool, and I can change the size of my artboard, and then I can go back and I can readjust and recreate all of my guides and move things around to place stuff that I need to in there as well. In my case, maybe I'll give myself a little bit room at the bottom later on to add some other information to it. But for now, this will be a good starting point for what we want. The last thing I can do is to rough in the title and rough in each of my little subheads. Now to do that, I'm simply going to choose my type tool. I'll click once, and we'll call it Rice Facts. I will let you make up whatever title you want for your design. As far as choosing a font, I want to make sure that my title font is nice, big, and readable, but also appropriate for what we're working, the information we're working on. So this is a nice, big, readable type font, or I can play around and try to find something a little bit more fun or something that's a little bit more appropriate to work for. Hey, this looks kind of nice for itself. Then I can also establish all of my subheads for each area. So this one, maybe I'll use that to be a sans serif type. Looking at my notes, need my top 10 producers. We'll resize that. This will be facts. And for the others, we'll put that information, excuse me. So how much rice is produced in 10 years? Simply copy and paste. Production share of rice for each area. And then finally, nutritional breakdown. Later on, I can adjust the colors of these and the placement of these as I work through the design. Now, since this is just the placement of everything, I can turn back on my grid. I'll go over to my layers panel, and I'm going to lock down my guide layer. And so when we start to create everything, we're going to place them inside of their own areas and work on top of that particular layer. I'll go ahead and save this up as an Illustrator file. So this is my rice infographic. In the next couple of videos, we'll focus on creating each of the different graphs and graphics to place inside of these.